Hello everyone, I hope you've had a great day so far. Today I'm going to take you through a way to make low poly hair. I believe the term is called Polygon hair. And I'll just be going from start to finish making a hairstyle in that theme. I'll be using, for this particular video, Blender 2.71, which from my understanding has just been released not too long ago, and I'll be using Photoshop CS2, which you can actually get free now. Just Google that, at least it's technically free. But in either case, if you want Photoshop for free, there you go. There's also an alternative called GIMP. You can Google that as well. It's completely free. As far as I understand it, has basically the same functionality as Photoshop, but I was taught how to make art and such, photo manipulation, all that fun stuff in Photoshop, so that's what I prefer to use. If you prefer to use GIMP, or if you know of any other program, use that instead. I'm fairly positive you can achieve the same results in any other program that allows painting. You might even be able to do it in Paint, but I'm not sure it supports. No, it doesn't support alpha, which you need for this particular technique. Unless you're going for a much more stylized approach, then by all means use Paint. To start out, I'll be making a new brush preset, so I'll just hit new up here at the file menu, and 64 by 64 should suffice well enough. I'm not going to bother naming this. I'm not going to save this as anything other than a brush preset. And then I'm just going to hit Control 0 to make this a little bit bigger so I can see it better. And let's see. Let me drag this over a little bit so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. I'm going to hit the brush. Set this up. Let's go 25 first of all. Basically what we're going to do is make a series of dots. And I feel it's important to have your hardness all the way up to 100%. Otherwise, well, not to get too far ahead, but it'll add a little softness to your hair strands, which you might want, but I'm going to add that softness later on in a different step. And basically just do whatever you feel is necessary. And one thing I almost forgot is that you need to have black instead of what I had there, which was a brown. That way Photoshop can basically apply whatever color it wants and whatever color you want it to be to the brush preset. Then just make a few dots. Personally, I like making one a little bigger and then going down 5 pixels, making a few more, then going down maybe another 5, but in this case I'll go down 10 and just make a few more dots, kind of like this. You don't have to make it pretty, you can just make random dots. I like making patterns though. Just personal preference on my part. And that should be sufficient. If you're happy with what you have, then our next step is to go to Edit and define brush preset. I've already made a fair amount of these, so I'll name this one Hair 5, I believe is what number I'm on. And it's already loaded up for me. I don't know if it will for you, but in either case, go ahead and close that out. You can save if you want, I'm not going to bother. And then just open up a new Photoshop file. This one, I believe it's 512 by 512, but I'll check real quick. Yeah, it's 512 by 512. I feel that's good enough to add the detail that you want and need for hair. Anything higher and, well, it's probably just wasted memory and performance and things like that. Especially because, at least in my case, I'm using this technique to create hair for game characters in a game I'm working on. Now, I believe this little guy right here is actually right up here in the default layout. And all I did was just grabbed it and dragged it out to make a separate window. And I like having this more available. It's, again, personal preference. And here, brush presets, just scroll all the way down. It'll probably have you somewhere up here, but scroll all the way down to where your brush is. And then brush tip shape. You see how, at least in mine, it might be different in yours, but how there's, well, you can see all of the little streaks, little dots, I mean, in the preview window here. Now to change that, you just go down to here, spacing, and I found that changing this to 5 really gets this going really well. Then I'm going to go to shape dynamics, check that in the little checkbox here, and usually it's set to pen pressure under this little guy right here. I just set it to fade, and you get this nice little, well, a fade from bigger to non-existent basically. And this little number right here you'll have to mess around with depending on how big your brush is. I'm going to drag this guy out of the way, and I'm going to experiment a little bit. Of course, have to create a new layer because this is an already pre-existing file I've been working with. And as you see, that's a little bit, perhaps a little bit short, so I'm going to change that up to, not 250, 200. See how that works. Yeah, that should work fine. Now I'm going to basically keep everything in grayscale. The reason why is, well, I'll just show you some examples. For instance, I have, let me find it over here. There it is. These are some strands I did earlier. As you see, completely in grayscale. This is basically the effect that we're going to be going for. And the reason why I've chosen grayscale is because from this base strand, these base strands, you can make, for instance, a brunette strand, a blonde strand, and a redhead strand, or any other color that you want your hair to be. And how you do that is really pretty simple. Basically, you take your base, then you get a color that you want, create a new layer, and over in your layer panel here, just switch it over to, let's find it here. There it is, color. And that's really all you have to do. Getting a little ahead of myself, but that's okay. I don't want to forget that. That's kind of an important step if you want non-gray hair. Now, pardon me. How are we going to go about making this base strand? It's really pretty simple. We're going to basically take, I guess you could say, traditional painting methods and use layers of colors. So I'm going to choose a nice darker gray color to start off with. And you want to make sure that you go from top to bottom and not something like this. Oops, bad example. Something like that. You want to make sure you don't do that unless, again, you're going for that kind of style. So just top down. If you want, you can add a little wave to it. Whatever you want to do. It's your hair. Do whatever you want with it. And I'm going to call that good for an initial base. But before I change color, as you saw on the other base strand, I had more than one. And I find that's a good idea to have more than one strand to work with. That way you can add a little variety, and especially with the kind that I'm going with, you can have different sizes. Like you can have a big one, you can have a small one, then you can have kind of a medium one, I guess you could say. And it's okay if it goes off, we'll take care of that in the next step. But I am going to move this middle one over a little bit. It might start interfering a little bit. And to do that, you just grab your box select here, drag it across there, and then just move it over using this little guy right here. I am going to center this though a little bit so I get a better idea. And again, this will be taken care of in one of the later steps. Now I'm going to choose a slightly lighter color and do much of the same, aiming for more of the gaps. Now, you don't want to fill in everything with one solid color, because that would really basically negate the reason for doing this. But you do want to get the idea across that there are multiple layers to the hair. And it's important not to start too low, or else it'll just not look quite right. There we go. And then this will be the last layer we're going to go with. Let's see. I think this time let's go with a little darker gray. Almost black, so I'm not going to put too much in there. Again, enough to get the idea across. And that should be good. Now we're going to abandon the brush tip that was made and go instead to this one. Should work fine. I usually set it to an even 10. And then again, over in your brushes tab, just make sure that your controls under shape dynamics are set to fade, and you'll again have to mess with that a little bit to get the right number. And that'll be sufficient for this brush size. Now I'm going to go in, choose a little lighter gray, and this is where we start adding the individual strands. By the way, apologies in advance if the sound of the ambient sounds are a bit annoying. I had to set the settings on my microphone a little bit high so that you could hear me sufficiently. And again, I think that should be enough to get the idea across. Go ahead and toss in a lighter gray here. And it doesn't look the greatest right now, but that'll be resolved soon enough. And then I'm going to go in with a darker gray. Just add kind of some hints of something else going on. Not too much, but enough to get the idea across. That, by the way, is my fridge. Apologies for that. And I think that is sufficient. Go ahead and save that. Make sure you always save your work. Otherwise, well, you might lose it, and that would just suck. Now we're going to go over to this little guy right here. I'm not sure what the default is, but it's right next to this little blur tool in this second section. And I'm just going to click and hold and go to the burn tool. On second thought, I'll stick with the dodge tool. And I have it set to shadows. I'm going to set that down to about 15. I believe that should be sufficient. Yeah, that'll be sufficient. And I have that set to shadow. I'm not sure I mentioned that previously. And about 50 with a hardness of 0 usually is sufficient enough. I think I might, oops, bump that up to 75. Yeah, that should be much better. And really all I'm going to do is just basically focus on the center of the strand and just paint in a little bit of a lightness there. You don't want to go too heavy, just enough to say that, hey, I'm a highlight. That should be sufficient. Now go back over and we're going to switch to the burn tool. I'm going to set this guy to 75. Its range is set to highlights, and exposure, I usually like to set that down quite a bit. So I'm going to go with a 10% exposure. And basically I'm just going to paint in the ends. And again, it looks a little messy now, but that'll be fixed soon enough. Alright. Save that once again. Pardon me. Seem I'm a little congested today. And the next step that we're going to do is create what I like to call a mask before we do anything else. So to do that, let me bring this guy over here, right click on your layer, duplicate it. That name should be fine for now. And then what you want to do, I'm going to go ahead and hide the layer that we duplicated. And then go up to Image, Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. And just make this completely black. Then you want to make sure in your color swatches here that you have white at least in one of them. And then we're just going to hit Control-Shift-N to create a new layer. Then going to Control Backspace to fill in. In this case, I believe this is called the background color right here. And then just merge those two layers together. Go ahead and save that, and we are good to go for the mask at least. Alright. Now what we are going to do with this is basically whenever we add in, like I said previously, the color, we're going to need to get rid of all the excess that isn't hair, basically. That isn't going to be a hair strand. I'm not sure I worded that right, but I hope you get my meaning. In either case, we're on to the stage where we are going to color this. So go ahead and hide that guy. Unhide this guy, and again right click on this layer, duplicate it. And again, I'm not going to worry about naming it. Then going to create a new layer, and I'm going to go ahead and make some brunette strands again. Let's see, maybe a slight more redness to it. I like a reddish brown. Then Alt and Backspace will fill that in. Looks like my computer's not too happy with me, but that's alright. And now, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to just go over to here, hit color under the blend mode, and as you see, it colorizes really well. Now what we need to do is go back to our layer that has the mask on it. And what I find that works out really well is if I use this magic wand tool here with a tolerance of 32, just click in the white space, then unhide the color layer, hide the mask again, and then simply delete. And now I'm going to go ahead and merge these layers. You basically do that. I don't know if I mentioned this, but you right click on a layer and then you hit merge layers. And you got yourself a good base brunette strands here. Now we're going to fix some of this ugliness here, and that's really a simple step. But before we do that, before I forget, let's take care of these little bit of weirdness going on up here. So to do that, just box select, and we're just going to take it like that. And it looks like we need to do it individually, so we'll take it like that, delete, like that and delete it, and like this and delete it. And they're a little uneven, so I'm just, for personal preference sake, I'm going to line them up a little bit better. You don't have to do it. It's not going to matter once we get into Blender. But again, personal preference. Now the next step to make this look a little better, we're going to go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. I believe that's how that's pronounced. And we're going to go with, let's see, you can go with 0.5 pixels. You can play around with it, getting the kind of thing you want. One moment. Okay. Thought I was going to sneeze there for a moment, and I'm sure you don't want to hear that. But in either case, let's see, 0.5, preview that on and off. I think 0.5 is really sufficient. And it's still got a little ugliness there, but that's okay. I'm not worried about it. Its odds are pretty good that no one's going to notice it that much, and if they do, they probably won't care. But if you have some ugliness like that and you want to fix it, I honestly can't offer much except going back and just redoing the stage where we added the burning, which if whoops. Sorry about that, I had to take care of some business. Now, I believe where we left off, we had just finished making the hair strands. Let's see here. Yes, we just finished doing that. I believe we are ready to jump over to Blender now. Let me see here. But before that, we need to save this. So, just save as, and once it decides to do its thing, and save it wherever. I save it as a PNG so the transparency is preserved. And I'll go ahead and save this, why not? Alright, and now we are done with Photoshop. So we can close that out. And as you see, I have something already loaded up, but before we get to that, we need to learn how to set everything up. So for this, I'm going to be using a base model from the software known as Make Human. Really great software if you're in a pinch and don't have the skill set to make a good looking low poly human being. So The first thing that we need to do is add a plane. So Shift A, if this will let me do it, there we go, and add a plane. Hit Tab to go into edit mode, and again, always save your work. It'll save you a lot of headache whenever things decide to crash on you. Now I'm just going to hit Control R, scroll up on my mouse wheel to create 2 cuts, and then I'm just going to right click to cement those cuts. Then along the, I believe that's the horizontal, I'm going to do 3 cuts. Left click, right click, and then save again. And then I'm just going to shape this into kind of a general rectangular shape. Now I'm using a custom setup for my for Blender here. So in my other window I have this, which is going to be very important. It is the UV image editor, and that becomes important because now we need to hit A to select everything, hit U to unwrap, and you'll see over here that it unwraps, but it unwraps sideways. So what we need to do is in this window, in the UV image editor window, we need to hit R, then X, and then 90. Then I like to go down to UV's constrain image bounds and then just hit G, and it will just automatically snap to the image bounds. Now what we need to do with everything selected is hit open right here. Then navigate to wherever you saved your hair strands, and then just load that up, and you'll see that it loads up nicely. Now this is only going to be 1 strand, so we need to scale this a little bit, move it over to the first one, and then just scale it accordingly until it fits in. And all I did there was I hit G to grab it, then hit Y to constrain it to the Y axis. Then I'm going to hit S and X to constrain the scaling to the X axis. And then just make that a tiny bit bigger. I'm going to do the same, grab it on only the Y and move it down so there's at least a little bit of hair left over. Then that's about all that we need to do there. I'm not going to show you how to set up the other strands. It's exactly the same thing as setting up the first strand. Now, another thing that's important is to set up so you can actually see this in the viewport, like the alpha and, you know, everything that you need to place the hair in an appropriate manner. To do that, first thing is tab out into object mode, Shift A, lamp, and I like to use a hemisphere lamp, and just drag that up a little bit. That should be sufficient. And then we're going to go over to shading here. Instead of multi-texture, we'll change to GLSL. And then over in this little guy in your, let's see, what is this called? Your properties panel, that's what this is called. You'll need to make sure that your hair plane is selected, then go over to your properties panel, and then we're going to go over to materials, create a new one. I like to set the intensity all the way up, specular all the way down, because this is going to be used in a game, and I like to get the general idea across of what I'm trying to achieve, I guess you could say, so I know how things are going to look and behave. And if I had specular, it would throw things off a little bit, at least for me. Then we'll need to enable transparency, alpha all the way down. Don't bother with any of the other settings. Then let's go ahead and name this there we go. Then over into textures, and change this from clouds to image or movie. Then just select the strands. If you want, you can see the alpha and you'll see it works. And some people say pre-multiplied works better, but I actually find that pre-multiplied adds in white outlines, where some people say pre-multiplied gets rid of those, so I usually just leave this at straight, and that gets rid of the outlines pretty well. Then for mapping, we need to make sure that this is UV and set it to the appropriate map. And let's see, we need to also enable alpha under diffuse and scroll over to materials, and you should see that everything is working out as it's needed to. Now to view this, I believe we have to go into textured mode. Yes, textured mode. Almost forgot a step there, but now you can see that you have a plane with hair strands mapped to it. And before we jump into just adding this to a model, I'm going to shape this. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, control tab, and then V to get into vertex select, which doesn't really matter, it's a personal preference. Alt right click, shift alt right click on both of these edges. I'm just going to go about like this into front view. And by the way, I'm in orthographic view. If you don't know how to get into that, that is pressing 5 on your numpad. Sorry, I didn't mention that earlier. Now, and to get in front view, you just hit 1 on your numpad. And it's important that you do not have, that you have the numlock button in the appropriate mode, I guess you could say. And all we're going to do is just, on the Z-axis, just do that a little bit. And scale it on the X just a little bit, bring it in. And tab out into object mode. I'm going to hit T. Make sure you're in tools up here, and I'm just going to hit smooth shading, and that makes it, well, look a little bit better. Now we're going to jump into that file you saw previously, and we're going to start actually making a hairstyle. This is a previous one I did. I did the eyebrows just like I did the hair, which is using hair planes and hair strands to make the eyebrows. I'm not going to get into all the details and tutorial side of making eyebrows, because that's not what this is about. You can just apply what you learn here for the hairstyle itself and apply that to the eyebrows, and that should work out just fine. Now, I've a model already loaded here, and my strands already loaded in. Now I'm just going to hide the hairstyle that I already have made, so that we can start with a fresh model. And these are the 3 hair strands I've made previously. I personally like how they look a little bit better. Not to mention, these are the ones that I'm going to be using in the game, so I figured I needed to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, I suppose you could say, and use these while making this tutorial so I don't have to go in and remake anything. Because in my opinion, the differences in the alpha really matter whenever you're starting to get all the strains in place. Now, another important thing that I'm going to mention right now is that you need a reference photo, and that's, again, my personal preference. If you know exactly what hair you're going for, or you just want to make something crazy, you don't need a reference image. But if you're going for something specific, you need a reference image to make sure that you get everything right. And for this, I'm going to be using this Fabio looking guy right here with this hairstyle, with the flipped up bangs and the long hair, long flowing hair. And that's basically what I'm going to go for. So to set this up, I'm going to go to this model, and over on the properties panel over here, I'm going to go over to this little orange looking cube thing, and then hit wire and draw all edges. And this basically draws a wireframe over the model. And that way it makes it easier for the next step, which is to go down here, make sure this little magnet icon is set up, hit that, go make sure that's set to vertex. Oops. Make sure this is set to center. And we should be good to go. You can make sure. Oh, I forgot one thing. My apologies here. You see this orange dot? This is the origin point. To set that up, you just select these two vertices in the center on the bottom of the strand. Hit Shift S, cursor to selected, then tab out into object mode, object, transform, origin to 3D cursor. And this is very important. I'm very sorry I forgot about that, because that is a very important step right now. Now, how we are going to do this is vertex snap this origin point to this model. And I already have this set up a little bit, so I have a little bit of a guide, so I know where the scalp starts and such. But if you don't have that, you can really just eyeball it and it should work out just fine. But usually, let me see if I can get a good angle here. Usually how hair works, if you're not familiar with it, usually it goes out basically like this, and your bangs go something like this. That's usually how hair works. So I figured I'll mention that so that whenever you start placing the hair, like for instance in this reference image, you can't see the side and the back, so you have to infer what that is, and knowing how hair usually goes, how it usually flows, really helps a lot. Now to get started, I'm just going to mouse over, say this point right here, hit G, and it should just snap right to it. Yep, there we go. First strand is in place. I'm just going to rotate X 90. And he's got a little bit of a mohawk going on, but that's alright. Then I'm going to select another strand here, if I can find my hair strands. Let me see. Whoops. I forgot one thing here. I forgot to duplicate it. And now we can grab it and move it into place. My bad there. Yeah, because it's important that you keep these handy, because you can just duplicate them and place them wherever you need them. So Shift D, I'm just going to hit the middle mouse button to constrain to the X-axis, and then I'm going to again grab with my mouse over a point, and it doesn't get it exactly where I want it sometimes, but it gets the general idea across. I'm just going to rotate in the Y by, let's say 15 degrees. And you'll see that his hair is not exactly symmetrical, but I'm not going to worry about making this asymmetrical. What I am going to do though is make this at least look somewhat decent. Shift D again, and grab it again. I think I'll try 30 degrees this time. Yeah, I think that works out really well. Yes, that should work out really well. I'm just going to rotate. I'm going to first disable snapping, because if you try to rotate anything, it starts snapping to the vertices on the human model. And obviously you don't want that. So to disable the little magnet here, you just hit Shift Tab. Then you can just rotate as much as you need to. So rotate on the Z a little bit. You can basically get it just how I want it. I think I'm going to even move it over a little bit, right about there. And rotate this guy too a little bit. And I feel it's important that your hair stays in the scalp and doesn't float above it very much. because that just doesn't look very good. Now I'm going to share a little trick here that I've learned, and that is basically we're wanting to go over to our modifiers panel and hit mirror, but you're going to see a problem in that it mirrors it, but it doesn't mirror it as needed, which is, say, we need it to mirror basically in the same position on the other side of the head. Now to do this, it's really pretty simple. Hit Shift A, add an empty. There's the empty, and then let's go with plain axes. That'll work fine. Then you just go into your object panel if your 3D cursor is somewhere out in space, and just zero out all of this. And I already have one set up, so I suggest in this little orange thing here, naming it something like center point or whatever you want to call it. Something so you know that it is right in the center. And seeing as I already did that, I'm going to go ahead and delete that guy. And then you go back here, go to your modifier under mirror object, go to your center point, and you will notice, surprise, surprise, it worked. Now we're going to need to do that with this as well because it's not exactly in the center. And it looks like we need to do a little bit of work with this guy. And we are going to need one more, I feel, right in the center to really get this going on. But before that, go ahead and mirror this as well, center point. And as you see, we have some bangs going on here. And it's important to keep track of which ones you use and which ones you don't use, so that you can get some good variety, like you see just a different end strand basically going along there, and it adds a little better profile look, I feel. To re-enable snapping, you can go down here if you want, but I'm just going to hit Shift Tab to re-enable it. Then I'm just going to hover over right here and G, and bam. And we got ourselves a nice looking set of brunette bangs right there. Alright, now the next step I'm going to go into is basically how are we going to get this onto here in a way that actually looks, well, less stuck up, I suppose you could say. And to do that is really pretty simple. Just select your strand, which, by the way, you select it if you're completely new to Blender. You select things by hitting your right mouse button. And then you hit Shift S, cursor to selected, and it'll get it right to that origin point that was set up earlier. Then you want to hit your period key, and that'll change this little guy to be around the 3D cursor. And what this allows us to do is in edit mode, Alt right click to select that edge right there. And then you want to hit O to select your proportional editing. And then you just want to hit R to rotate. Then you want to scroll this up, and you'll see that, hey, it follows along. But we need to disable snapping. So Shift Tab again, and then just like that. But you might want to constrain it to only the x-axis, otherwise it'll go everywhere, as opposed to where exactly you want it to be. And then just basically just make this however you want it to be. And I'm going to hit G twice, and this enables your edge slide mode. And I'm just going to slide that back ever so slightly so there's a much better curve to it. And there's one strand done. And the reason why I mirrored these over and decided to discard any symmetry in the reference model is because basically it'll mirror everything. So if I do something over here, it'll do it over there, which is brilliant in my opinion. Great little modifier they added in Blender. And again, cursor to selected, tab into edit mode, R, increase your fall off maybe a little bit, straight to the X. And there we go. We're starting to get a good set of bangs in my opinion. This one needs down a little bit though. There we go. That looks better. This one we need to start rotating on a different axis to get it to start curving a little bit. And that can probably be brought back just a little bit. Alright, that's looking pretty decent. Let's see. Next one. Now this one is going to just go kind of like this. So, again, this is a highly repetitive process, I have to say. But it works out really well if you want low poly hair that looks nice and is, well, low poly. And there we go, we have some bangs going on. Now what I like doing is selecting all of these guys here and just hitting M to move to a new layer and moving them to, well, a new layer. I usually pick this one right here. And the reason for that is because, well, you can see quite clearly that these bangs are covering up some important parts that require the long flowing hair to work. So if we started messing around, you could do it, but at least my personal preference is to just move that and actually see what I'm doing instead of guessing what I'm doing. So the first thing I'm going to do is select this little guy here. Again, re-enable, shift tab, re-enable snapping. And I'm going to put that guy, oops, changes this to your pivot point to individual origins, by the way, for this. Otherwise things will go a little screwy. Anyways, I'm going to put this guy, let's put him right about there. Disable snapping, rotate on the Z, -90. And then cursor to selected, add a mirror modifier around the center point. And usually what I do is I do one strand when I'm doing this kind of stuff. I do one strand, I modify it, then I just build up from there. So basically this is going to be his kind of like a sideburn area, I suppose you could say. So hit period again to rotate around the 3D cursor, or make sure proportional editing is on, and there we go. Although I need to do it around the Y this time. And rotate around the X to cover that up a little bit. And I'm just going to stretch this a little bit so that there are indeed long flowing strands. And what I'm going to do here is Z to get into wireframe to select some points that are hidden. And then I'm just going to hit Alt Z to get back into textured And I'm just going to move these guys a little bit. It's very important that, like I think I said earlier, that you can actually see the transparency, because you can see that, for instance, right here, the points are right over here, and if you had no transparency, it would be a little difficult to see that there is in fact a gap there. But in this instance, that kind of gap is not really bothersome, I suppose you could say. Type out into object mode. Then we're going to do one of these big guys here. I'm going to go ahead and add the mirror modifier first around the center point. And before I do anything, I'll rotate around the Z 90, -90. And again, make sure that you have the individual origin selected. I'm not sure what the shortcut is for that. If you know what that is, do let me know. I actually forgot to check on that before I made this video. Now we're going to enable snapping, and let's see, let's put that guy right about there. Should work out good. And you saw what happened there when you don't do it around the appropriate axis or axis. I'm not sure what the singular is for that. See, we got a little bit of something going on right here. Easy fix though. Yeah, that's looking all right. Now we get to do over the ears, which in the reference image I can infer that you actually cannot see the ears, so I can feel pretty comfortable in just basically overriding the ears and placing things on top of it. And I'm going to grab this guy over here. Again, making sure that I'm at individual origins right now. Mirror modifier. Shift tab. Shift tab again. And like I said, this is really a pretty repetitive process, but that's alright. I know it's been said before with other people that have done this in earlier versions of Blender that this can be somewhat soothing. Which I have to agree, it is strangely soothing. And you can see, tab out into object mode, that with the bangs, that's going to look, well, that actually looks a little bit better than I thought it would. And with doing this kind of check, you can actually notice problems like this strand right here is, well, it's really pretty pointless right now. So what we can just do is just delete that guy, and there we go. Maybe go into this guy and select these points. And I'm just going to make sure I'm around the individual origins again, and just move that on over a bit. And you can see there's still a little gap, but I'm not going to mess with that strand anymore. I am going to mess with this guy though. You can see there's still a gap there, but you can tweak yourself to death, as one person said. I wish I remembered who said that, but unfortunately I don't. But in either case, grab that vertex there, and I'm just going to hide that little gap there. And don't worry if it stretches a little bit. I personally think it looks fine as is, but if you don't like that, then you can do whatever it is you feel you need to do to make that work better. And you can already see here that if we look at side by side, that's looking pretty close to what his Fabio's hair is looking like right here. And I'm just going to go ahead and hide those bangs again, make him look kind of like a monk or something. Although I'm not sure monks have long flowing strands like that. So you never know, some might. And I feel it's important whenever you're doing this that, like for instance, I've picked out, let me go ahead and change that color. I've gone and picked out this line to align my hair strands to, my hairplanes to. And I feel it's important that you are consistent with this. That you don't put one here, then one way up here, and then one down here, and so on. Of course, I'm a big fan of consistency, so there's that to consider. See, I'm not sure I can get away with putting it right there, so I'm going to put it right there instead. If I put it here, yeah, it'll have too much of a gap there. So that should work just fine. And as you could see there, I forgot to disable snapping. So I'm going to go ahead and redo that with snapping disabled. Yeah, that got a much nicer result. You don't have that bald patch going on there, which you'd have to go in and manually fix. Which, if you can save a little bit of time, I suggest save some time. Bother having to redo something if you can just do it right from the start. See, I can move this guy back a little bit, but I want to make sure I cover up that earlobe. Yeah, that's looking alright. That's looking alright. Now we've reached the back part. And that is a special kind of fun. Go ahead and fix this bald spot right here. That's okay, that's up a little bit. We'll go in and do some special things soon. And by the way, this huge gap here, we're going to go ahead and fix that too in the next few steps. Now the back, the way I suggest doing the back, which by the way I hit Control 1 on the numpad to get into the back view, and the way I suggest doing it is you do one strand like this, change that again to a nice red, do one strand like this, one strand kind of like this, and then one right in the middle, which that isn't a very good line, but you get the point nevertheless. So basically one strand here, one strand here, one strand right in the middle. kind of like how the bangs were done, kind of. I can't remember which one I went for, so I'll just grab one and hope for the best. Oops. There we go. Let's see here. Probably right around there will be good. And another important thing is that you follow how a real world hair would actually work. So like here, you would expect hair to do this if it was like gelled or something like that, but this hair, oh, it just looks like hair, it doesn't look gelled at all. So instead, what I'm going to do is make this come out just a little bit. Which, by the way, to change the axes, what I'm doing is I'm changing it from global to local, and how you do that is you just hit, whenever you're in a mode like say grab mode, you just hit like X twice and it'll get into local view. And let's move that down a bit. I'd expect the hair to be a little bit longer in the back. And before I forget, mirror modifier. Looks a little strange, doesn't it? And now that I look at this, we might not need the other strand here. We'll just see how it goes. Oops. And this is why it's important to know what you're doing. Let me see here. Let's see. Going to copy that and then just undo that because I forgot to duplicate things. My bad there, sorry about that. And there we go. Copy and pasted right where it needed to be, so that no work is needed to be redone. Which I love not having to redo work for silly mistakes like that. This guy I'm just going to stick right there. Again, I'm just hitting period to go into cursor pivot mode. Yeah, I don't think we'll need those extra strands, but we might to give it a little more volume. I don't think it's really needed, to be honest with you. Yeah, I don't think it's needed at all. Grab this guy again, and now what we're going to do is basically make the cover strands, which will start at this point and just go out like that. I wish I could set the default for this. You probably can in the preferences, but in either case, the strand will start around there and then just drape around like that. Alright. I keep forgetting the mirror modifier. So it's been one of those days where you just feel a little out of sorts, I suppose you could say. But that's alright. Hopefully this is helpful nevertheless. And as you see, we need a little something something right there, so I'm going to grab this guy because we probably need a pretty good size, making sure to duplicate it. We probably need a good size to cover all of that, and I don't think this little guy here will quite do it. And let's just go ahead and snap it to this guy right here. Oops. And that's why you need to make sure you're in individual origins. There we go. Another thing I've noticed is if you get too close to the actual axis itself and hit R, then it's extra sensitive. But if you go out a little ways, it's a little bit better, a little bit more precise, I suppose you could say. Yeah, that's not looking too bad. Now he's got wings. Must have had some Red Bull. Alright. Proportional editing is your friend. And it's okay if there's like little hints of the head through the hair, because to be completely honest, that's how real hair is. It's not very, how you say, it's not one solid bulk. It's individual strands emanating from a point. Which is why if you're doing something other than game work, particle hair, I feel would work out really well to get a nice effect. But I never could figure out how to get particle hair to work well enough and get it converted to a low poly mesh well enough to actually make it work. Alright, now that is looking pretty decent if I say so myself. See how it looks with the bangs. Yeah. Now we just need to fill in this bald patch here. And there's a few ways I go about doing this. There is a way where you can basically just move these in a little bit closer and do it like that. Then there's another way where you can just add more strands, more planes, and basically add some volume. But I'm not sure adding more would really help the look of this. And I'm noticing something else too, is that these bangs here are not quite where they need to be. Basically, I would leave it here as is, but as you see, it's got a little bit of a gap here with the where I place the scalp stubble and where the skin of the face begins. So I'm just going to move that a little bit. Not going to go super crazy with it. Yeah, that'll work great. Let's see. Go ahead and compare it to the reference image. I think our Fabio knockoff here is looking pretty decent. We just gotta fix this bald patch. Switch that over to individual origins, turn off the bangs, so that we can work on this. And we might be able to do this with the current state of things, and we might not be able to. Oh, and turn off proportional editing for this kind of work. Yeah, we're are going to have to add another loop here, which won't mess up the UVs as long as you don't unwrap again. If you unwrap, then that's going to cause some minor problems. And I'm not going to go all the way in, and the reason for that is that hair usually there's usually a gap between the where the strands are emanating. Like you have all of these going like this, and there's usually not hair that's just kind of sticking straight up or covering that, unless the bangs are combed back in such a way to cover that. See if I can change that to red and keep it this way this time. Now how you'll see that there's clearly a slight issue here, in that if you get it at just the right angle, you're going to see right through this, and depending on what kind of shader and material you're using for your game, for the hair, you'll either see the hair itself or you'll just see nothing. As I have yet to decide if I'm going to bother with the extra processing power to render both sides of the plane, I've come up with a little technique I like to use to basically ensure that if I don't use that, I don't have to. So to do that, Control R to add a loop cut, and we're just going to, doesn't look like it decided not to do that, so we're just going to add that again and move it all the way up, and you'll see that it stretches the UVs a little bit. That's quite alright. And then just Alt right click on this guy, and we're just going to move him down like that. And then maybe move it over just a little bit so there's a nice little incline there, I guess you could say, or something like that. And we got a little weirdness going on here, which is okay. We just gotta, I'm going to do Shift V to vertex slide this just a little bit. And now there's not so much weirdness going on there. Basically, I'm just going to do this kind of technique for all of the strands. And definitely don't be afraid to add loop cuts as needed, because you will probably more than likely have to. Oops. Don't want to do that much. And that's looking okay. The only problem is that it's doing kind of the opposite. It's starting to go back like that, so I'm just going to rotate this guy a bit and move him up. Because you want a gap in there, but you don't want such a gap that exponentially gets bigger, because that would just be kind of weird. And wouldn't be very true to life, I don't think, unless you styled your hair like that again. There's a lot of things you can do with hair, and all of it can just get way too crazy if you're not careful with how you style things. At least when it comes to 3D modeling. And that little gap there, as far as I know, will be covered up by the bangs, but I'll make sure. Yeah, that's going to be just fine. Oops. And if you ever do something crazy like this and you don't mean to do it, just right click and it'll just automatically undo it, instead of having to do Control Z. slight gap here that needs to be fixed. And that didn't do it. Let's see how far along these strands are. How far under they are. There we go. That's great. There's nothing hard about this this polygon hair. It's very, very straightforward. In fact, I wouldn't worry about a tutorial if I didn't think I could add a little something to it. So I hope that I have been able to succeed in that. And maybe teach people something that they didn't know about. Because there's definitely a lack of tutorial videos that are current when it comes to Blender and Polygon hair. Wrong axis there. There we go. That one's sticking up a little too far. There we go. By the way, this cube is just some part of the Make Human mesh. I don't know its purpose. If it was just my model, it wouldn't have that, and I'm sure yours doesn't unless you're using Make Human as well. Oops, there. Shift right quick to move that forward just a little bit and straighten that out. And you see we're getting a pretty decent looking, almost organic little strand going on there. Now the back is a little tricky. This guy I'm not even going to worry about bringing up. He's going to be well hidden here. I am going to bring him up just a little bit right there though and do the technique that I've been using. Just so that it looks a little bit better. Let's see here. Alright. I suppose this guy's next on the plate. Going to grab this guy and make sure I don't move him on the Z. I'm going to hit Shift to Z so it only moves on the X and Y axis. And then move him up a little bit. See where he is. He needs to move back just a bit. Yeah, that'll work right. Because there comes to a certain point in the hair on a real human where basically you have the hair emanating from a central point and it like starts to just do that sort of thing. So that's always what I've observed. That hair usually works like this. So there will come a point where there is no more gap. And there's a little ugliness there. I don't want that poking through. Not sure I want that going to that, so there we go. I don't think we'll have to worry about these guys either, because this guy right here will probably take care of that, but we're still going to do that technique. I'm going to bring it up just a little bit though. And bring it up just a tad more, and go ahead and put that guy in there. Now this guy, we're going to have to scale on the X a little bit to cover up these strands. Then we can move this guy up. And now I can't even see that, so I think that's actually a good thing. So I'm going to do this in wireframe. And hopefully that's extruded in well enough. And we need to go back into here and cover up this little gap here. Let's see, it looks like all we really need is these guys here. And let's see. That's not going to work now, is it? So it looks like we'll have to go into here, go ahead and select these guys right here and move them up a little bit. There we go. That looks like it works out real well. Alright. Throw in the bangs here. I'd say that's looking alright. Yeah, got a little weirdness going on right here though, but I'm not sure I'm really concerned about it too much, but I'll go ahead and work on it anyways. This guy, let me find his end here. Alright, I'm going to move him up just a bit. So that the strands are actually where they need to be. And so it looks a little bit better now. Alright, now the last step to get this done is we need to apply all of the mirror modifiers. Now, I know what you're thinking, we have to go in, go over to here. Once we get in here, click apply. Go in there, to the next one, click apply. And so on until all of them are applied. But there is a quicker way to do it that I've recently learned about. So to do that, what I'm going to do is basically hide all these lights here. I'm thinking I'm just going to hide the human guy and the eyebrows. So we only have the hair. And then wireframe, hit that. Right click, we'll shift, holding shift, double right click on that, and we got just the hair selected. Make sure that one of them is orange, light, well I guess it's a light orange, or gold or whatever. Anyways, make sure one of the strands, one of the planes is kind of this lighter orangish gold color. Make sure the rest are all gold. Then you want to hit Alt-C, and this will convert it to mesh from curve, meta, surf, whatever. And that, if you click on this, no more mirror modifier. It's all just one object. Now before we deselect it though, let's go ahead and join these into one. So now we have one object. And I'm going to go over here to the outliner, and seeing as this is my second hairstyle, I'll do hairstyle 2. Go ahead and unhide the human. Go into here, deselect the wire and draw edges, and you can get good little gander at our Fabio knockoff. I should probably unhide the eyebrows too because that just looks weird. And there you have it. That is how, at least how I go about making polygon hair, low poly hair, whatever you want to call it. And if you're curious, we're looking at 660 triangles, which for a game is pretty fancy, especially for hair. So I do hope this has been helpful to you, that you learned something, and well, take care, and I hope you have a great day.